again. So there are three components of any of these change efforts, right? So the number one is the change itself that we are trying to drive. Number two is the change agents, which is, number one is change. Number two is change agents. Change agents are not only those guys who will actually drive the change, but also those guys who need to change. And the last one is the environment within which we have to enable this change to happen. So let's look at each one of these a little bit in more detail. But before going there, let's first try and understand a typical adoption of change looks like. So any given change, or for that matter, innovation or adoption of innovation is the same. So there is a certain percentage of people who are who will take anything which is new, right? So these are people who are hungry for things which are new. So this is the innovators or early, really early adopters. Then comes the early adopters, which is about 13% odd. So these are guys whom I would also call fast followers, innovators, early adopters, and fast followers. They are the guys who understand what is being shared, find a way for them to leverage the newness or the change to their benefit. So they understand what is going to happen, what is happening, and they find a way to use that to their advantage. Then comes the early majority, late majority, and laggards. Some people will never change. So in a typical change project, you will always have someone who doesn't ever want to change, and which means that you'll have to actually let them go at some point in time. What this also tells us is that you cannot change everyone at the same time. There is going to be a set of people whom you will target at every stage of the change process, which means that your communication needs to be planned such way, which also means that the key people that you will interact with in that particular phase of your change project will also be different. So we'll come back to how all of this maps out to the 4 stages of change that we have spoken about when we speak about the other phases of change as well. So moving on, we also need to understand the kind of change that we are trying to drive, right? So is it a policy change? Is it a process change? Are we trying to change an entire system? Are we trying to change people's behavior? Are we trying to change people's belief systems? Or are we trying to change the culture of the organization itself? Now, each stage, if you think of this as a ladder, okay? So each stage is actually progressively more difficult. And at the same time, each stage has a progressively non-linear or logarithmic, or in a way, a hockey stick kind of impact. So it's very easy to change a policy. All you need to do is figure out what is in new policy and kind of make the policy change. Process change is slightly difficult, but still easily doable. Systems change is probably where the difficulty level starts going up significantly, and also where the impact of the change also starts getting significant. So it's not very easy to get people to change their behavior because of various reasons. One of the most important reasons being inertia. People like doing things that they have always done in an environment in which they have always been, right? So that's also one of the reasons we will talk about at a later stage, which is around social proof and the importance of having the environment which allows the change that you want to bring or see to kind of grow. So belief systems lie or define the kind of behavior that you actually see. And while it is difficult to change behavior, but you can still change behavior by enforcing certain kind of behavior. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you've also changed the underlying belief system. Underlying belief systems will change once you are able to touch people's emotions, once you are able to ignite their passion, ignite their belief systems. And culture change happens uh, when everything about a particular organization, right from the structures, right from policy, process, system, behavior, all of that need to change in order for the culture to change as well. So that's the most difficult thing to kind of achieve. Not impossible, but very, very difficult. There was a study done by McKinsey which said that almost 70% of change efforts fail. And when they talk about these change efforts, they talk about, they don't necessarily talk about the policy and process levels, but they talk about change when it comes to changing systems or systemic changes, behavior changes, belief changes, or culture changes. Those are the kind of changes which 70% of them fail in most organizations. So we've seen what kind of change we are trying to do, right? So we also need to understand what is it exactly that we are trying to change. What is the current behavior, which is the from, and what is the future intended behavior, which is the to. What do you want to change from? What do you want to change it to? Unless you are able to clearly define and explain this difference, which is what is the current state and what is the expected state? What is the current action in terms of behavior, in terms of belief systems that drive that behavior, in terms of the culture that enables that behavior, to what is it that we want them to behave as, change their behavior to, change their belief systems to, change the culture to. So both these needs to be very, very explicit. A lot of change fails because this clarity in terms of what needs to change and what needs to change it, what that needs to change to, is not really clear. So very, very important step right at the start. We need to figure out how do we do that is something that we will come to later. But just for now, understand that this is something which is very, very important before we can actually move to the next phase of change management or transformation management. So we spoke about the change that we are trying to do. So now we'll talk about change agents, right? So there are three kinds of people that you will encounter. Number one is a set of people who get impacted by the change, which means that these are the people who have to change their behavior, change their belief systems, change their actions in order for your change effort to be successful, right? Then there are the influential leaders. So these are people who actually lead these people who get impacted. And these are also the people whom people go to if they want to check whether or not something is making sense. And then there is a third set of people called influential connectors. In every organization, people intuitively understand who gets work done, right? These are guys who or girls who may not necessarily have the titles in their that say that these are leaders, but they know, or they are the guys who connect, let's say, two departments. They have connections within multiple departments. These are the kind of people whom you would go to if you really needed, if you're really stuck at something and needed to figure out how do you come out of this stuckness, right? So these are the influential connectors. These may or may not be impacted by the change that you're trying to drive. If you're trying to drive large scale change at a culture level, almost everyone will be involved, right? But in most cases, I'm assuming that you're not looking at that culture level change, but you're looking at either a belief or a behavior level change, and that too in a particular kind of a department. So mostly these are the three kinds of constituents or stakeholders, if you want to call it that, that you will end up working with. So the intersections of this Venn diagram is what makes this entire process interesting, right? So the people who are impacted and are also influential leaders, they are the people whom you should always keep up to date in terms of the progress that you're making, in terms of what is the plan. So these are the guys whom you should continuously, consistently provide updates to. The section of people who are impacted and are also influential connectors. So these are the guys whom you should go to seek feedback, to check whether or not what you're trying to attempt to do will work or not. Who could help you figure out the next step? Who do they think are the most critical people if we want this next step to succeed? So you go to that set of people for feedback. And the last section, which is people who are influential leaders and connectors. These are very, very few people. And you know them instantly if you walk into an organization. You have to recruit them to be change agents, for them to kind of drive change within the larger organization. These are the guys whom once you win over, they will become your legs on the ground, who will have, number one, not only influence, but also say and across organizations, right? So you have to recruit them as the change agents. And a confluence of all three, which is people who are impacted, are influential leaders, and are influential connectors, they should be the ones who are part of your steering committee. Typically, the mistakes people make is that the steering committee is all about senior leadership only. Big mistake. If you really want people to change, they need to have a voice in how the change is being rolled out or how the transformation is being run. They need to have a voice to decide what needs to be changed and how that change needs to happen. And that is why you not only seek feedback from the people who are impacted, but also recruit them to be part of the steering committee so that they have representation throughout the process, throughout the program. And they have the ability and the satisfaction of having been part of the team which actually leads the change, right? So this is where I'll talk also, we'll talk about the concept of buy-in versus investment. So this is where the investment will come in. So that's something that we will talk at in one of the later sessions for sure. So another dimension of thinking when it comes to understanding the people who are actually impacted is to see and to understand that not all of the people are impacted in the same way, right? And if you also look at it as maybe a ladder, you will find that there are conspirators who are actively, openly talking against you, against the project, against the change within the organization. And there are people who are combative, which means that these are the guys who openly are not aggressively trying to combat or trying to be against your project openly, but these are the guys who work under the radar but are trying to sabotage your project. You need to understand that, right? Then comes compliant. These are guys who will do or who will make the change if it becomes mandatory. And these are also the guys who will not change until everyone else around them are changing. These are the guys who will ask you, show me who has changed and how it has benefited them, or mandated, right? As long as it's not a mandate and and they don't see people around them making a change, they will not make the change. Then comes cooperative. So these are also guys who are saying that, okay, I'm willing to change, provided everyone else around me changes as well. It makes sense, but I will not be the first one to change, is what they're talking about. And they're also saying that, okay, more than happy to do as long as that doesn't lead me into a problem. Then comes the people who are collaborative. These are guys who will actively work with you to kind of make the change happen. They will give you resources. They will be willing to kind of work with you in terms of idea generation. They may not put their reputation on the line, or they may not get behind you openly, but they are there to support you and the kind of change that you're trying to drive. And the last is co-creative. So these are the guys who see clear value in the change that you're trying to drive within the organization, and they also see potential value for themselves in driving this change, or at least who seem visible enough within the organization that they are trying to lead this change. So these are the co-creative guys who will actively work with you to, number one, identify what needs to change, and through the process, they will actively put their entire force behind you. Now, if you look at it from two angles, right? So in terms of engagement and in terms of commitment to change. So if you look at commitment to change, it moves from low to high, right? So the commitment to change is the lowest at the conspirator level and highest at the co-creative level. And it progressively increases as you keep going up the ladder. Whereas the engagement is like low right at the middle and high at both the edges. High at the top at the co-creative level because they really want to work with you. They really want to make things happen. And high at the conspirator level as well, because they do not want you to succeed, right? So they will actively combat you in order for you to fail. So the engagement is lowest at the middle, and as you go up or down, the engagement levels increase from that perspective. It is important that we know who's who within the organization that we are trying to change. You may not be able to change everyone. You may not be able to move people from one level to the other, but at least you need to know who falls under whom, where, so that you're aware of what is happening in the organization. As they say, you need not be political, but you need to be politically savvy to understand the politics that is happening within the organization, especially if you're trying to make significant change within that particular organization. So we also need to understand what drives people in order for them to change, right? So there are primarily 4 drivers for people, primarily. I mean, there are, of course, there can be more, but fundamentally, I think there are 4. Number 1 is more money. So some people, bonus, additional money, additional, that is what drives them. There is another set of people who think that time is the only commodity which once spent cannot be earned back. So for them, anything that gives them time back, they are willing to do. So for them, it is always about how can you improve their productivity? How can you give them time back on their calendars? Then comes status and recognition. So these are social needs, right? So these are needs where people want to be recognized for what they are being done. People like or crave attention, status. So these are the only 4 things that primarily drive people. And if we know, at least for the key stakeholders, for example, the steering committee, the people whom we are going to provide regular feedback, the people who are your change agents, and the people whom you seek feedback from, at least to those constituents which are critical at the intersection of impacted influential leaders and influential characters, at least for them, we need to know what drives them, so that when we start planning and when we start working with them, we can keep this in mind and kind of tailor our conversations with them basis knowing what drives them. So then comes the entire environment, right? So the environment can be internal and external. So what do I mean by internal environment is nothing but culture, right? So certain organizations are completely internally focused, which is, I do this and that's about it, and take it to market. Certain other organizations are external focused, which is where you say, okay, customer is first for me, or partner is first for me. So everything else kind of flows from there. Some organizations are political or data driven. some organizations are led by functions and some organizations are collaborative. So for example, Apple is a function-driven organization and also internal focused, right? So because they believe design is what kind of leads them. Some organization could be sales led, some organization could be development led. Same way, some organizations are entrepreneurial versus hierarchical, which means that, if in an organization you can start a project without actually having to go through a level of approval process, and you are kind of rewarded for the initiative that you take, that means that you are in an entrepreneurial environment. Whereas if it is always best if you take the permission of your leadership before you start anything new, you are in a hierarchical organization. So what kind of an organization are you in? It is important that we understand that, because it is like the soil and the environment in which you are trying to plant the seeds of change. So if you plant the seed in the wrong soil, in the wrong environment, you're not going to get anything right, out of the seed. So if you really want them, you might probably need to have manure, you might need to do something else with the environment first before we can actually expect to see any results from the change effect. So the next one is the external environment that your organization is functioning in. So if you plot this on a 2x2 matrix, one side being the ability to change and the other side being motivation to change. Motivation to change because they are being compelled to change, right? Because if for example, you are operating in an environment where the rapid changes are happening, your competition is changing significantly, they're changing the goalposts, they're changing the way they engage customers, and customers are becoming more and more demanding, that's high motivation to change, because otherwise you're going to go extinct. But the other extreme is, you're operating in a very stable environment. There is a lot of barriers to entry. There are only 2 or 3 major players, all of them pretty similar to each other, not much innovation happening in the organization. So that's motivation to change is probably going to be really, really low. Ability to change is based on your past performance. In the past, have you been able to change and have change efforts in your organizations succeeded or have failed? And how much have they succeeded and how much have they failed? And how much of that do you as an organization carry in your collective memory? So if you look at it, so if you have low ability to change and low motivation to change, you are in an environment, external environment, which is going to be stagnant. The exact polar opposite, where the ability to change is high and the motivation to change is high, is where you are poised for good things or great things. That is where the change efforts or the seeds of change that you're going to put in will have the maximum results. So the other two quadrants is ability to change is high, but motivation to change is less, is when your organization becomes adaptive organization, because they have the ability to change. They can quickly change and adapt to any change that happens in the environment. If you have high motivation to change but low ability to change, then you're operating in an environment which is aspiring, which means that you probably need to figure out a way to instill the confidence that is required for your organization to move from being aspiring to becoming poised. So we'll stop there. I think the next phase is something that we will do next week when we start talking about the mobilize phase. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope it was useful. Take care.